Welcome to Coffee and Keys, where we blend our expertise and personal experiences to unlock your awareness of the real estate industry.
They're the best.
Here they are.
And now, here's your hosts, Darlene Kemp and Crystal Jacques.
We're back.
And
To get rid of us.
And I've lost count at how many podcasts we've done already, but these are fun, right?
They are fun. They are fun.
And today we've got a special guest with us. So this is the first time having guests on our podcast. So we've got Kedron Springer with Springer Law Group. We kept saying we wanted to get an attorney in here to talk to us a little bit. We've been going over the contract. And of course, I'm not an attorney. All I can tell you about the contract is this is how a lender is going to look at it and how we look at a contract. And I know, Crystal, you were going over the contract as far as helping them fill it out and sign it and things like that. So we just thought it's awesome. And Kedron said she'd join us. So welcome, Kedron.
Thank you. I am, first of all, I want to say so honored to be the very first guest on your podcast. Like, how exciting is that? I'm going to add it to my and just a little bit about myself. My name is Kedron Springer. I've been practicing law here in Hampton Roads for 19 and a half years. I can't believe it's almost going to be 20 years. I don't feel that I've been doing it that long. I feel like I just graduated law school the other day, but apparently time flies. So
really
my entire practice has been in real estate, transactional, with residential and commercial. So very well versed in this contract. I see it multiple times a day in and day out. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have a million questions for you, Kedron.
Now, Crystal, we've always said that we talk and go over all the time. So remember, gotta stay on track.
And I'll give you, if I don't answer, I'm going to give you the standard lawyer answer, which is, well, it depends.
I love it.
It depends. I love that. Yeah. We actually say that a lot too. Hey, what's the rate today? It depends.
Yeah, it depends. All right. So where are we going to start? Because real estate law is so broad.
Yes.
And I think probably we start with the contract. Just, take a little piece of that, the important pieces of the contract. Probably the biggest question that I get is, when is it considered a contract? When am I in escrow? At what point of this transaction is it legal?
You mentioned a couple terms that probably the average home buyer, they've done this multiple times, is not familiar with. And one of those is that term escrow. What does escrow actually mean? So it actually, funny enough, has multiple definitions. In the lending world, we talk about an escrow account. And that's this idea that money belongs to you, but it's being held by a third party for your benefit. And then in contract world, we talk about when are we in escrow? Well, what does it mean in that regard? Well, that's just basically when do we have a ratified contract? When have we placed our funds in escrow to basically be held to make sure that all parties are doing what they're obligated to do under the terms of the contract? And then you have this escrow agent, which, what does that mean? What is an escrow agent? Well, an escrow agent is someone who is overseeing the money. Oftentimes when you're doing a contract, it's going to be the buyer's representative. So whether it's an attorney or a title company, whoever's handling the buyer's side, actually that should is considered your escrow agent. But to really give that, so when is a contract, when do you have a contract? Question is, there are 4 elements of a contract. You have the offer, then you have to have acceptance, then you have a mutual understanding and consideration. So when do you have a contract? Well, when all of those elements have been met and satisfied, that's when you have a binding agreement.
So it's not at the point that we are submitting this offer for a home.
No.
That is not a contract.
That is an offer.
Ah, okay.
But that offer can turn into a contract if the seller accepts the terms. If the seller changes one term, now you have a counteroffer.
Ah.
But you still don't have a contract because now the buyer has to accept the change term.
Right. So then neither party is obligated until all parties agree, correct?
And neither party is obligated until all of the terms have been agreed upon. And if any one term changes, and it's not agreed to, you don't have an agreement because you don't have a meeting of the minds. So that's what's very important, is that term, meeting of the mind. And in all honesty, let's just use a little common sense here too. A meeting of the minds is significant because it creates the expectation of what this relationship is going to look like between these parties for the duration of the contract. So a meeting of the minds is very important.
That's a
Right.
term that they kind of drill in our head when we are studying to take the real estate test, meeting of the minds.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was
Yeah.
just made up, but it's
And
a
then
true story.
it's a maybe
It's a
too
true
much.
term.
It has real meaning. It has real
Yeah.
meaning. I think
Yeah.
the biggest problem in any relationship, and if you look at a contract between a buyer and a seller as being a relationship between two parties, is unmet expectation. So creating that
Absolutely. Yeah.
expectation, that's what the contract does. That meeting of the minds creates that expectation in the beginning. And I think that is really what helps make a transaction a smooth, enjoyable experience, is if we've created the right expectation at the start.
Right, with a contract, which also means that each party understands what they're agreeing to and what they're
Absolutely.
obligated to.
Let's hope
and
they do.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's important to, read. What are you signing?
Mm.
And if you don't understand it, you've hired a professional. I would hope that you've hired a realtor, that they're there to guide you through that process, to help you understand
Right.
this before you even sign it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
and
what
I
we're
think-
there to do.
Yeah.
Because I know both of our sides, from the financial side and from the real estate side, the realtor side, we both are talking legal,
Sure.
so it crosses over both sides.
Well, and there's an element of what you have to learn to be a licensed agent, to be a licensed loan officer. You do have legal classes you have to take. You
Yeah,
have,
we do.
there's continuing education requirements that all realtors and loan officers have, that there is an aspect of it that is the law side of what you do.
Mhm.
So, I mean, yes, I think to a large extent, you understand it.
Mhm.
You just have to be careful that you're not then stepping into the shoes and saying, well, this is how it is and this is how it's going to be. It's like always, well, I'm not a lawyer, but this is what I
It depends.
It depends.
It depends.
Right. It depends.
It depends. Yeah. And that's one of the things that we kept saying when we were going through it, as far as, that we're not attorneys, we can't give legal advice, right?
Mhm.
It's so that's why it's so great that we got to have you on here, because what we keep saying is, we always say it's whatever we're doing with the buyer, it's their choice.
Mhm.
Oh,
And so what we
100%.
want to do is educate them on what their choices are.
Mhm.
What type of loan do you want to have? Here's the ones you qualify for. It's your choice on which one that you want to take, your choice on which rate and points. And when it comes to the house, it's which choice, what do you want to offer, right? It's your choice. We're just kind of guiding them and helping them understand, how they want to go from there. So I love the fact that it says the mutual decisions, because it's educating them on the choices that they have on that legal and binding contract, right?
Mhm.
And I think
And
it's
so one of the
important
biggest question is, when is it? Yeah.
because, like,
When is it?
as professionals, as realtors, as I think it's important, even before you ever make an offer, for a buyer to understand, I'm not going to make the decision for you. I'm gonna give you the pros and cons. I'm gonna tell you, based on my years of experience, how I see certain things playing out, what market conditions look like. But ultimately, you drive this stream.
That is true. And that's something I do put out there. I do say that. If I think they're making a poor decision, I also say that, but I have a reason why I think it's poor. But it's up to you, to how you want to approach that.
And I think that as professionals in general, even as a lawyer, I don't I don't make the decisions. Yes, I can make some legal strategies, but ultimately it is the client's decision what direction they want to go in any given scenario.
Right.
I
So the
agree.
best thing that we can do is just help them understand their options, help them
Yes.
understand, you know, the contract is there with all the disclosures and all of the things in there just so that they understand, you know, what their responsibility is and what, you know, how they can look into what those choices are and how to make the best choice for them based on
Mhm.
what they're looking for and what their family's looking for in the house that they want to buy so that they know what they're getting into. So when we talked about, you know, the contract being legal and binding, at what time is it, you know, legal and binding? So you said it's when you made the offer and it's mutually accepted by all parties. And then I think you said consideration was another one in there
Consideration.
as well.
That is an
So
element of an enforceable contract. And so, just in very simple, basic terms, consideration is the earnest money deposit. You know, once you've put that money down, now you have a full binding agreement. It's important too to understand that, especially in real estate, there's no oral agreements in real estate.
right, everything has to be in writing.
We look to the four corners of the document. That's kind of our rule of thumb. It's the legal term, the four corners. But what's in the contract? If it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Even though it's in the MLS.
Yep.
Say, you know, because I do that a lot. You know, this thing, this item conveys as is, or, you know, but they don't put it in the contract.
Yeah.
And we don't counter back with it in the contract.
Then it's
Then
not
it's,
a part of the contract.
isn't that
Yeah,
something?
I've seen that as well, where the MLS may have advertised like seller will pay a 1-year home warranty for buyer, but then guess what? It doesn't make its way into the final contract. So it's not binding because that listing is not an agreement between a buyer and a seller.
So it's important that everything is in writing.
100%. It helps to take, so ultimately when you think about this as being a business transaction, and maybe this sounds kind of wild for me to say, but there really shouldn't be a lot of emotion involved in a business transaction.
I agree.
The fact that the real estate contract, that there's no oral agreements and it has to be in writing, it actually benefits all parties because it takes the emotion out of the contract. It's in writing, it's right here. It doesn't matter what you may have promised or what you may have said in passing. This is what we look to.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And we all know that this probably is one of the biggest emotional decisions that anybody makes, is spending that much money on the house. And this is going to be my house that I'm going to live in. So we deal a lot with emotions.
Absolutely.
But I love how you say that the contract itself, when you're looking at that contract, that it's important that you step back from the emotions.
Yes.
And really understand what you're getting into, what's on the paper, because that'll help tell you, you know, again, make that transaction a smooth transaction. We kept talking about, we're trying to help them with the different steps that they need to take. So we talked to them about getting pre-qualified and about finding the house and how to find the house. And then next step was, okay, now it's making an offer. So we talked about the offer a little bit, but you're absolutely right. When we start to talk about legal and binding, that's when they need to step back, take the emotions out of it. Here's your choices. Here's what this contract means. And again, I think that's something that I've seen over the years that have really changed, is how we present that contract, right? You know, I was always saying, 30 years ago when I got into this business, every agent, the buyers had to come to the office in order to, find houses and do things, because it wasn't so computerized. And nowadays, especially after COVID, it's made it so easy, just electronically sign, and everybody just click, 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 click. And you think there, all of a sudden you've just made an offer. But you need to understand what the offer is before that seller signs the offer, right? And to know what you're agreeing to on the buyer's standpoint. So I love the fact that you say you have to take the emotion out of it. You have to kind of step back a little bit and make sure you understand what you're clicking through and signing, correct?
Yeah.
That's the first step of a legal contract. So you're taking the first step.
And I think, Darlene, kind of to piggyback off of what you were talking about with the click, oh
boy.
I, even to this day, I'm not a super fan of DocuSign and all of that because it causes people with our short attention spans because of, scrolling through our various social media feeds and things like that. We don't want to take the time to really educate ourselves and read it. We're just like, okay, fine, we'll just sign this, click, click, click.
Right.
And before you know it, you've got a ratified contract, you've got a binding agreement, and you went through 20 pages in 5 seconds.
Right.
So
20 important pages.
very important pages that are creating that expectation,
Yeah.
dictating the relationship that's about to take place, and you don't know what you've done. So I even to this day, I still print when I have to sign a contract. I print it and I read it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I'll go back and DocuSign or click, click, click. But I want to make
Right.
sure I know what I'm getting into.
Right.
Right. And I think a lot of the buyers at that point, number one, they're excited that they're getting the house. They're nervous about getting the house.
Mhm.
But we also talk about the language that, if you're not speaking our language all the time, there's a lot of terms in there that people don't understand. So I think that that's why it's really important to have some really good representation when it comes to that contract, right, Crystal? As far as,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that if they're reading that contract, they don't understand what something says. A lot of times they're going to reach out to you and say, what is this?
What does this
maybe,
mean?
yeah,
The biggest
does
one
this
is
really mean? Yeah.
ratified. I use that all the
Yeah.
time. Okay, we're ratified. They're like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means you just bought a house,
Right.
but you also have to fulfill all the obligations
Right.
that's in this contract. And again, usually as on my end from the mortgage loan officer, I really don't start that full approval process until I have that ratified contract, because that's what we're really approving you on. Yes, we're approving you on your financial situation and your credit and things like that, but we're
Right.
also approving the property as well. So with that, there comes certain things in that contract that we're looking at, and time frame wise. So usually that loan is in there. But tell us a little bit, I don't know, maybe Crystal or Kedron can tell us a little bit about, once they've got that ratified contract in hand where the buyer and the seller have come to that mutual agreement on all the terms to the contract, some of those things the buyer may not have all the answers to yet, such as, will the house appraise, right?
Right.
And some things like that. So there are times when the buyer can get out of that ratified contract, but it can, maybe you can help us with that as far as when can a buyer get out of the contract?
That's a question for Kedron, because a lot of buyers will try at the wrong time. There are certain times that they can get out, and I certainly do. I'm 100% honest with my clients and tell them, if you're still thinking about it, you could walk at this point. You can walk at that point. You may not get your home inspection money back, but you'll get your earnest money back. So
Right.
what are the right times to walk?
Right. And they call those what, contingencies? Or is it
Contingencies. Yes.
Yeah.
So you have this agreement, but again, like Darlene is saying, it doesn't mean that you're going to buy a house. It means you have a contract to buy the house, but then there's certain conditions that have to be met along the way. Some of those conditions are obligations of the seller. A lot of those conditions are obligations of the buyer. Virginia is unique in a way that it's called caveat emptor, which is Latin for buyer beware. Virginia is known to be a buyer beware state. So that takes a lot of the burden away from the seller to tell the buyer all the various things regarding the property, the neighborhoods, and things like that. So it is very important that every buyer take the time to educate themselves about what is important to you. Is it important to you that you're in a homeowners association or not? Is it important to you that you can have chickens on your property or not? What is important? And do your due diligence. And so one of those contingencies that we hope built into the contract, it scares me when buyers waive it, is this home inspection.
Yeah,
That-
I've had plenty of buyers waive them.
It scares me to death.
Especially in this
Because
market, because
They, at that point, like you I'm sorry that you found a major defect later, but you waived your home inspection. And that home inspection, obviously it's time sensitive because you don't want to have it done, 2 days before you're going to close. So it's done in the beginning. But if you are not satisfied with the result of that home inspection, you don't have to proceed.
That's right.
But you have to put the other party on notice that you're not going to proceed within a very specific time frame. Or you are now obligated to proceed if you have not notified them within the designated time built into that contract. But it's where the buyer can look at the condition of the property and decide, do I want to undertake having to replace a roof, 5 years from now? Do I want to take the risk of replacing the HVAC? Or, hey, there's these defects and it opens up another negotiation. But you have this, you think you've got this ratified contract, and you have this obligation to buy. But then when you get to this home inspection part, it's a contingency in that if you find things wrong with the property and you present them to the seller and say, are you willing to do these things? And the seller says no. Well, now you can walk away with penalty. You get your earnest money back and you find something else. I think it's important to understand that there's, again, it's always about the fork in the road, right? So you're walking down the contract road and then you hit your home inspection and there's some forks in the road. In which path you choose? Am I going to just walk away? Am I going to try and negotiate repairs? Or am I going to just proceed regardless? So those are your three big options, I think, after you have a home inspection.
Right. And again, there are choices that the buyer gets to make.
Exactly.
And we're just trying to guide them along the way because the time is of the essence.
Yes.
As far as taking care of any items and any negotiation items in that as well.
And that home inspection kind of peels back the onion. Let's open it up. You've been in the house, 2.5 hours. Now you're going to see what you're getting ready to buy. I am a fan of the home inspection. However, I was around in the end of 2019 through 2023, where it was fast and furious. And, I've had a lot of buyers that are like, look, everything can be fixed. I want this house. Fortunately, I've really never had anything come up. I mean, for those buyers that I had that did not do the home inspection. But I have had calls from other people that I did not represent. And they're like, well, so-and-so at work gave me your number. And I want to know if you can answer this question because I purchased this house without a home inspection and this happened. But in the situation, buyer beware.
Buyer beware.
It's like I can't help you there. And I've had calls from parents. Saw you on the internet. My son purchased a house, and I would talk to him, but it's nothing you can do.
It's all about them doing their due diligence to make sure that they understand what they're getting into.
Absolutely.
Because that's what they're agreeing to. So, again, the market's been crazy. We talked about buyer's market and seller's market, and where, in previous years, when I first got in the business 30 years ago, sellers were paying closing costs at that time. In this kind of market, it's hard to get a seller to pay closing costs because it's now a seller's market instead of buyer's market. And I think that's where that frenzy came from. You've got 10 people that are looking at the house at the same time, and that you want this house and you're just trying to figure out a way to get your bid to win over somebody else's. So again, it is that buyer's choice, but as long as they really understand what that choice means. If it means that you're buying this house blind, then if there's something that goes wrong, you're buying the house blind, and buyer beware.
It's your responsibility.
It's your responsibility when you do that. So there are other caveats and contingencies along the way. So, usually that home buyer's inspection is that first one. And I always say we try to wait to order the appraisal until the home inspection's done, because it is a chance for the buyer to say, I don't think I really want this house because it's more work than I thought it would when I originally wrote the offer on it. So we don't want to have them pay for the home inspection and the appraisal. So a lot of times we'll wait for the home inspection to be done and then get the appraisal. But and the appraisal and the lending can also be a contingency, right?
Yes.
Right.
As we
Yeah.
look
If the
at it.
property doesn't appraise. Now, again, it's a contingency that you can choose to keep in your contract,
Mhm.
or it's a contingency that can be waived. And as you were mentioning, that market in 2019, our COVID market is what I call it. In our
Yeah,
COVID
crazy.
market, the appraisal contingency was waived left and right.
You are
Yep.
kidding me. I
Yeah,
did
I've
not
seen
know.
'em.
I did not. I've never
Yeah.
waived an
Nope.
appraisal
Waived,
ever.
or they'll agree to pay so much above
Yep. It
the
didn't matter,
appraised value, which we've seen that.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's interesting because the appraisal, I think it is just as important and just as significant as a home inspection. The home inspection is going to give the buyer a very detailed understanding of the condition of the property. But that appraisal then comes behind that home inspection and gives the buyer a very detailed report of the value
Of the
of the
house.
property. You are spending money. Like, are you overpaying, underpaying? Are you paying what it's worth? That is so important. And
Right.
in the contract, yes, that is a contingency, and it's a lender required contingency for certain types of loans.
Right.
But
Because we said on the last time that we're only going to lend based on the lesser of the appraised value or the purchase price.
Right.
So, if you're, looking at, VA buyer putting 100, it's 100% financing, no money down. But if the appraisal comes in $10,000 low, then we're only going to lend based on that. So in that case, if the buyer agreed, they'd pay the 10,000 above. Otherwise, the appraisal comes in low, and now it's no longer a ratified contract anymore. Right? They have to go back to negotiations. Right?
It's not
the buyer either
enforceable.
has to pay. Isn't right? So
well, it's
that
enforceable. I mean, it's enforceable to a point, but because of that contingency, the contingency says if the contingency is not satisfied, then that's a way out.
That's a way out.
Home inspection. There's condo, HO, property owner association contingencies. The termite report, it's not really called a contingency, but I'm going to tell you that the way that the contracts that we use here are written, it becomes a contingency in my mind.
Yeah, because it doesn't say it has to be clear.
Well,
I think it does.
it does
Oh,
have to be clear.
I understand it
I
that way.
think that the bigger issue is that there is a provision where it says the seller will make up to a percentage of the purchase price in repairs, right? So what if the termite repairs exceed that percentage?
Yep.
Well,
paragraph 13.
now-
I've said that a lot of times.
Now-
According to paragraph 13.
the seller doesn't have to do the repairs if it exceeds that amount. So that's a way for the seller to say, I'm no longer going to sell under this contract. We talked about HOA docs. Those docs can be small and they can be voluminous.
There is no HOA doc less than 750 pages. I've never seen one.
And it's funny because you have such a short time period to review those, but
72 hours.
it is important for buyers. Like, if you're moving into a property that has an HOA, know what you're looking for. Are there certain things that you know up front that you want to be able to do, and can you do it? What size dog can you have? If you're in a condo association, there are a lot of times that they will limit the size of your pet.
The weight.
That is important.
Or the breed.
The breed, the weight.
Right.
That is important.
Or we actually just had somebody that got out because the condo association had a note in there that if their dog became a nuisance, they would be required to get rid of the animal.
Ooh.
And how vague is that, right?
A nuisance. That's a matter of opinion, isn't it?
Right? That would be a tough one. And that's what she said is, I've got a beagle. It barks. That's just what beagles
howls.
do. What am I going to do?
Yeah, beagles are a nuisance. I have to.
I love my beagle. But it barked at everything.
Everything. But, along those same lines, when you get those condo docs, those HOA docs, what is the financial condition of that homeowners association? I would venture to say that most people don't look at that piece of it. But it's important. What is the financial condition of this association? Does it look like maybe they're not making ends meet? And if that's the case, you're going to end up with a large special assessment that may
Yes.
not have been
Yes.
issued yet, but it's coming. So those are all things to really dig into as a prospective
Mhm.
buyer to know what you're getting into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And know what your options are, because there's a lot of options there that I was recently just learning things that you can actually get insurance to help you with special assessments. Unless you know what that insurance is, you don't know. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
things there that are just, it's just about asking those questions. Well, here we are talking about condos and special assessment. They don't even know what a special assessment is. Do you want to
Exactly.
explain?
So yeah, a special assessment is oftentimes like you pay your monthly dues or quarterly dues, whatever. But then if the association finds that there's something that needs to be done, so a lot of times maybe they're gonna revamp the landscaping. Maybe if it's a condo, they're having to replace the roof. Well,
Mhm.
that is something that benefits everyone. Therefore, it's charged to everyone. And so that is not something that is oftentimes built into the budget, because those are things that maybe they don't do on a yearly basis. They do it on an as needed basis. And so they will put everyone on notice of a special assessment. And what's important to understand about condo fees is they run with the property. So
Mhm.
they transfer with the property. So if that special assessment is not paid by the seller, if you're aware of it and the seller doesn't pay it at closing, buyer, it becomes now your obligation because it runs with the property. Another thing I find with the issuance of homeowners association condo docs a lot is the association will do a condition inspection. So
Mhm.
when they release those documents to you, they have sent someone out to inspect the property and just to make sure that the exterior of the unit is in compliance with all of their rules. And there's a document where they will note any deficiencies. One thing I find it does not happen a lot is that people don't pay close attention to that. And it is my opinion that if you do not ask the seller during your review of those docs to correct those deficiencies, they are
There
not
it goes.
required to do so. And you cannot back out because they didn't do it if it's past your timeline to review those docs and accept them.
So here's a question for you, because those two items that you talked about are two things that, as the agent, I go directly to that page. I don't read all 750 pages, but those two could affect the sale of the condo. So I go to those pages and check it out. Special assessment, if there's upcoming special assessments, I let my client know. But yes, on a condo, they do that exterior inspection. So I go to that page and you see this list of things that need to be done, right? I usually advise my clients to do an addendum. Let's ask for these things, because sometimes the association will fine you after closing.
Absolutely.
And, based on that list, that it's not done. So say we have a seller that refuses to do that list. What happens at that point? Can I force this, or can my buyer walk if it's not done, if they do not agree to do it?
So long as it depends.
It
So
depends.
long as you are within your timeline, and that's built into that contract to review, as long as you are within your timeline, you can walk. But if you come up with this after your timeline has passed, and then you present the addendum, well, now you're stuck with it. So it's so important. And Crystal, like you, when I received the resale package, which unfortunately sometimes by the time I get it, it's after the timeline has passed.
Right.
But as soon as I get it, those are the things I go to as well. I go immediately to the condition report, and then I look at if there's any special assessments coming up, because I want to make sure that, hey, did you ask for these repairs to be done? Do you understand that you're now responsible for those?
Mm-hmm.
So it is important that agents don't just pass that on. Like, look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Not
it's a teamwork item. You know,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
go see if you can have that pet pig, and I will go and see if there's any, you know, special assessments coming up,
Right.
or, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Because otherwise, again, we're back into that world where click, click, click is so easy. Hey, we got the homeowners
Mhm.
association thing here. Click here, says you've received it. And then you're right, you've lost the opportunity to go back and either
Mhm.
ask or question the repairs. You've accepted it.
Mhm.
Again, buyer beware.
Yeah.
You're going to have to take care of them if the kind of association or
Yeah.
homeowners association asks you to after closing.
Mhm.
You know, so yeah, I think it's really important that, again, we keep saying that these are the choices of, you know, the buyer and the seller going through these contracts. But, you know, I think it is kind of our responsibility to point out and say, this is why it's important that you review these. The reason we have this contingency in this contract is to give you an opportunity to accept it as it
Mhm.
is. Yeah. So that you have full knowledge before you actually sign the paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, another common contingency, we talked about appraisals, home inspections. We talked about condo and HOA docs, but financing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want a buyer get a pre-approval, but that doesn't necessarily, they haven't necessarily dug into every aspect of your financial history at that point. They've done some digging, but not the amount of digging that will ultimately be required. And so financing is another contingency. If the financing falls through, then that is a reason that you can't purchase the property.
Oh, so disheartening.
It is. And we
It
don't
is.
see it.
But life
We
happens
really
too.
don't see
Things
it
do
often,
happen.
but it does happen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That the financing falls through. But I mean, the advantage there to the buyer is you're not under an obligation to buy something that you do not have the means to buy
Goodbye.
any longer. But I guess, you know, that goes back to before you ever put in the offer, make sure that you've gotten a pre-approval from a well-respected and vetted lender like my friend Darlene.
And my
And
savior.
with and one of the things I've always said too is anybody can issue a pre-qualification or pre-approval based on the information gathered from the borrower, right? But
Mhm.
until you dig into the documentation that's required to back everything you've said, W-2s, pay stubs, bank statements, things can come up in bank statements. Oh, wait a minute, you know, you've got a payment going out on this bank statement every month. You know, I thought you said you didn't have any child support. Oh, I forgot about that. Or, you know, so things do come up, you know, and we always have to, like, you know, refresh the credit. They opened up a new account 90 days ago. It wasn't shown on the credit report now. And they kind of forgot it was a new account, or, you know, so things happen, but that's why it's good to not only do the pre-approval, but get the documentation up as soon as possible so that, you know, they do know that they're financial there. And then right before closing, you know, a lot of people forget about this too, but within 5 days of closing, we have to call and do a verbal verification that the clients are still employed. I mean, things do happen. You can't quit
We've
your
had
job right
that
before closing.
situation. We have.
I mean,
She did the
it's sometimes
verification.
the little
They
things
said job. He quit.
quit.
You know, he quit months
He got
ago.
a new job, but he forgot to tell us.
Yeah.
That was on that new construction. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
So
are
those
your
are the
best
things.
friend
Yeah.
throughout this process. You tell us
Yeah.
everything.
Tell us everything, right? I always say
Everything.
we're looking out for you in this transaction. So tell us everything. You know, I always tell them, don't even, you know, apply for anything. You know, if you absolutely have to, call me first. And, you know, so because when you write that contract, right, you're also saying that you're applying and you've given the lender and you've had to make, I think that's something else, is that they have to make loan application within 7 days of the ratified contract or something. And a lot of people think that loan application is just signing the application. No, I really should have all the pieces that I've asked you for to make sure that, you know, everything you said is correct. And then you don't have to worry about it after that, right? Once you're approved and you got that in, yes, we're still waiting on appraisal. Yes, we may have to, you know, approve a condo, you know, or something like that if it's in there on the lender's point of view. So there's some, you know, certain programs like VA requires a clear termite letter. So we have to look at those. So, you know, we're still gathering some information because we're approving the borrower and we're approving the property. But you're right, the contingency. So what if something were to happen and then now I can't get the loan for him? Is that then an out on most contracts?
Good question.
It depends.
It depends.
It depends. Yep.
So if the buyer has done everything that they are required to do, then yes, that is an out. But if the buyer has taken an action that intentionally put them in that situation, that is not an out.
That's not out.
So for instance, if the buyer was laid off, that's an out. If the buyer quit, not an out.
Right.
Because at that point, a buyer took an action. They took an affirmative step to change their situation.
Right.
And
If that
so
led
that
to-
is not a reason at that point to get out of the contract with no penalty.
Or if they decided to, buy new furniture for the house before they close.
After they were told 5 ways to
After they're told
pay, not to do that.
not to do that.
I had a client that purchased a Maserati about a week before closing. I know.
Fancy.
Yeah.
Well,
Took it back, right?
He took it back.
Took it back.
He had to take it back.
I mean, I've had it happen. We're sitting at the closing table and I said, so we're going through all the documents. And I was like, and this document right here says you have not earned any new debt since you applied for the loan. If he says, well, what about the car I just bought yesterday? And we all start laughing and I looked at the agent like, and she's laughing. And I'm like, but
That's not funny.
did you really do that?
What's so funny?
That's not funny.
I'm getting pumped right now. Thank God the loan officer was sitting at the table. This was not a joke. We were not being pumped. He did go buy a truck the night before, and I said, so did you sign the loan papers last night, or were you going to go do that later today? And he's like, no, I did it last night. I looked over at the officer, and I said, well, sir, this is your show now. You need to figure this out, because unfortunately it worked out that his debt to income, it was still within the threshold. But
Thank goodness.
we had to stop the whole process and
Yeah, because
take a minute.
Mhm.
And the loan officer had to go reconfigure numbers and look at all of this and decide, can you still qualify for the loan?
yeah.
Woo.
And 24 hours could have made all the difference in that.
24 hours. I always tell people, please do not
Yeah.
open up credit, not even after you
Not
leave
even-
my office. Wait until the
Yeah.
next day.
Next day. Until it's
Mhm.
recorded
Okay.
and it's all dispersed and it's done.
Yes.
Mhm.
So another common contingency, I think, that we don't really talk about much, but it's one of my personal favorites because I like to geek out with this, is title.
Title.
Intentional.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
What
But
if
that's
the seller-
beyond the buyer's control.
It is, but it is a
Mhm.
contingency for the buyer to be able to say, I am not going to buy this house because you cannot convey clear title.
That's right.
Yeah.
Where it becomes a contingency is basically you have a settlement date. And by this date, there's a certain date, all of these things have to be satisfied. Seller, you have to be able to convey clear title to me by this date certain.
Mhm.
And if the seller cannot convey clear title, well, at that point, the buyer can choose to extend and wait, or the buyer can terminate and walk away. They're not obligated to stay in that for who knows how long for the seller to clear the title deed.
Right. And I think that that's one that a lot of buyers don't even realize is a thing. They don't talk about it a whole lot. I mean, what is clear title? When you're buying a house,
Mhm.
I don't think they realize that, I'm buying the house. They may think, okay, I'm buying the house and the shape it is and the carpet and the walls and things like that, but they don't realize the things that would be considered a lien. And then if there's a lien on that property, when you buy it, you also buy that lien, right?
Yes.
Right.
And
You're
that's,
buying
And it's
then-
not clear
buying-
title.
Yep.
yeah,
You're
and
buying the
that's
history of that property.
right. So if there was work done on the property, like the seller didn't pay the contractor or mechanics lien or something like that, that's another thing that would also hinder that title, right?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
these are the things that they're kind of looking at. So I know a lot of buyers are going, why can't we close? Why can't we close? And they're saying, but we have an issue with the title.
Yeah.
And I always say, and then there's a frustration in there. And I'm saying, but it's in your best interest, because if you close now, it becomes your problem.
Well, what's
Right?
really interesting, yes, it does become the buyer's problem, but fortunately, lenders are so vested in
Mhm.
this process as well, because it's really the bulk of the financial investment comes from the mortgage company. If the mortgage company says, I'm not sending money on this, and
Right.
I have clear title. So it's the title contingency really, it benefits both the mortgage company and the buyer. That the seller, that obligation of the seller extends to both parties who benefit from that.
I mean, it's, some of it is not just related to the house. I've seen tax liens. The seller owns taxes and the IRS puts a lien on the property.
Yes. And the IRS has, and they are within their rights to do that without a court order.
I've seen some heavy ones.
And tax liens are first lien position, right?
They are in the first lien. That means that gets paid.
That means
first
the lender's going, wait a minute, no, we
else.
have to be in first lien position on the first mortgage. Therefore, we can't close until those are taken care of.
Even child support, right?
Child support comes after the mortgage.
Okay.
But it's interesting because what a lot of buyers don't think about too is if you're a buyer and you have a tax lien, well, it's not a lien on the property right now. But
it will be.
As a title, doing the title, we actually do run buyers because if they have a tax lien, the moment they buy that property, that tax lien jumps in front of that mortgage lien. And most people don't realize that. It impacts
and
its position.
And it impacts the mortgage. So even if the buyer says, I'm okay with the tax lien, I'm going to go, no, we're not. Because we have to be in first lien position in the event that anything happens.
Right.
They could foreclose on the property to pay that tax bill, and it leaves the lender out in the cold, right? Yep. So that's really important to make sure that we're in that first lien position.
So when you say first lien position, is that the order that this item gets paid? Like that's the first thing during a sale?
Yes.
Correct.
I like to equate it to if you're playing dominoes. You've got your dominoes lined up here. Who gets paid first? And can anything, like if a foreclosure happens, do all these other liens have to be paid? They get wiped out. So it's interesting because if there is a foreclosure in the title chain, looking back at prior owners, and they had judgments that weren't paid, now we have to be very strategic about looking at, when was when was the loan recorded that got foreclosed on? Did it actually wipe out those liens? Or are those liens still attached to this title? So,
So would they still attach if they're after the mortgage or only if they're before?
Only if they're before.
Good question.
Before.
Only if they're
Wow.
I mean, obviously there's nuances and I could geek out for days about all of this.
It depends.
It depends.
But it does. It depends. It really does. Depends on the mortgage as to whether the liens get wiped out if they got recorded before or after. A lot of times it depends on the mortgage.
It's interesting that a lot of people, they'll talk about the mortgages and they'll talk about the real estate and the inspections and all that stuff, but you really don't hear them talking about title a whole lot.
No.
And one of the things that, that I say when I'm doing my loan estimates is, in there, there's the settlement attorney's, fees, but it also includes the title search, which also includes the lender's title policy, which is required. And I'm always going to give you the cost of an owner's policy. It may be an option, but I highly recommend it because I've seen it used so many times in this area and it's so important and they just don't understand what that is for. And it's to help them with that, making sure that they do have clear title, right?
Yes. Because title defects are very expensive to resolve. And they are very hard to resolve when they're against prior owners. So having that policy takes the financial burden off of the owner of the policy to pay to correct those defects.
Right. And it's a one-time fee paid at closing that'll protect them, because it not only protects them from what I understand from when they own the property, but when they sell it now as a seller, aren't they guaranteeing clear title? So if they don't have clear title, it could come back to them in the long run afterwards too. So
the language,
I always say,
and a standard D is general warranty, which means I guarantee that you have clear title, purchaser. And I don't think sellers really understand what they're guaranteeing when they're signing that deed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we have the most 3 important caveats to a transaction right,
Right here.
here.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah. Kind of knowing what you're getting into. So,
Yeah.
let's see. As far as that contract, we talked about, what makes it a contract. So you said the 4 things.
Mhm.
It's an offer that has been mutually accepted by all parties, right?
Mhm.
And
Considering
that everybody's on the same consideration.
Mhm.
And then, but built in there, there's always those contingencies that we talked about for ways that a buyer can. They're not necessary just to get out of the contract, right? It's just that if these things come up where I was not aware of and I don't like them, that's then can
Right.
get it out to the
the
contract.
buyer
right?
can
So that
always choose to proceed forward, but now they're
Right.
doing it with their eyes wide open as to that particular situation.
That's right.
Right.
So again, it comes down to buyer, you have choices. And you're the one driving the train. We're just guiding you. We're giving you the pros and cons of each road, each fork in this road.
Mhm.
Right. Well, I got one other one. And again, is a question that I get. And as a lender, I'm going, it's your choice. We don't require it. Talk to the settlement company because they may have a difference in it. And that's the survey.
Oh,
Oh,
Tell us a little bit about a
that is,
survey or what
you
a
know
survey
what?
is.
That is an entire podcast on its
It
own.
could be
It really
entire
is.
podcast.
Really?
Yeah.
it really
Because-
is a podcast
Yeah.
because, I have had the RAIN contract, and I can't remember if the most recent updated version has it, but for several years, there was a provision within the contract where the buyer says they waive or desire a survey. And if the buyer said they waived a survey, but then they changed their mind later and said they wanted it, I can't sellers say no. We're not going to let them
Yes.
to do it. But I don't see how their desire to have a survey or not have a survey has anything to do with the seller, number one. But surveys can become fatal issues. Things that are found on a survey,
Unless they're clear, they usually do.
yes, can negatively impact title. And
Yeah.
so, honestly, for me, in any scenario that's not a condo, you should get a survey.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have people say, well, the fences have been there for years and everybody's fences are in the right place. And I'm like, okay, but what if your shed is sitting within an easement?
Mm-hmm.
And early in my career, I actually had an incident where it made all the difference in the world because the buyers were buying this fantastic, huge backyard because they wanted an in-ground pool.
And they
And they
couldn't
waived
do
a
it.
survey. And the easement for the electrical company went right through the backyard.
Backyard.
So they couldn't put a pool in. And they were
Mhm.
buying this house that was
that
one of
reason.
the biggest things. Yeah. So those are the things that could really affect you. And I guess we could start it because a lot of people are going, well, what is, what's the home inspection survey? What are all these things? But the survey really sets the boundaries to the house, right?
Yes.
It kind of
Mhm.
explains what your boundaries are. And they tell you whether anything's like encroaching on your property and right. If they're, your neighbor has a fence that's on your property or,
Mhm.
and usually fences
That's
are
probably the most
not
common
a big deal,
one.
but yeah,
That's
yeah,
common.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's, and then to me, those are kind of like easy fix.
Yeah.
But if it's a building, somebody
It
built, a
depends.
detached garage. It depends. Build a detached garage on your lot, all right? Or
Mhm.
even a tree, because I had an issue with somebody that had this huge oak tree that started to die, and they couldn't figure out who was responsible, but the city was
Mhm.
requiring them to take the tree down.
Mhm.
But the neighbors were arguing whose tree this was. In other words, who has to pay to put this tree down?
Yeah.
Survey came in, the tree was right in the middle of both lots.
Oh no.
I can tell you,
Oh.
I've had to spend time researching case law about trees.
Yeah.
And
Which ones?
neighbors having trees, and can you lop off the limbs that are hanging over your house, even though the tree was on their property? I mean, you would be shocked to know how much case law is out there on that topic
trees.
alone.
I would think that
Because
there
trees could be
is.
on, somebody might have planted that tree on their lot, but all of a sudden it grew and now it's grown into your lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the same thing with the fences. The fences doesn't seem like any big deal, but if you have a rotten fence and it's fallen over, somebody's might require it to be taken over. Now, whose responsibility is to pay for that?
Who does
Yeah.
it belong to?
Fence to be taken away. Who does it belong
Yeah.
to? Right? So those
But
are
these are the
those are
things that
little
go with
things
home
that-
ownership.
Yes.
These are the
it
things.
does, yeah. And those are the little things I think people forget about. They get so excited. I've got this house. I got this thing. Another $500 for a survey, or I don't even know how much they are anymore. What are they?
About $650.
I think they're going up. They used to be
Yeah,
500.
everything's been
Last
going up.
few I've seen is between like $650 and $750.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
Wow,
it's
yeah.
worth it. It really
It-
is, especially if you're buying a house for, I want to put in a pool. Love this backyard, want to put in a pool.
Mhm.
Right.
Definitely
So again, it's a
worth it.
choice. It's a choice because, as a lender, I don't require it, but I'm not telling you not to get it. I'm putting it, it's definitely, if you want to be aware of what you're buying, where you're buying, and how you're buying, then that survey could have everything to do with that.
I
Mhm.
think surveys are so important that in my package that I send to buyers, where I have them sign retainer letters and disclosures, there is a disclosure solely for surveys. And it's a hold harmless. It
Mhm.
says, I'm telling you to get one. I'm telling you it's important. If you choose not to get one right now by signing this, you are holding me harmless from any damage that may come later when you find out basically that there's defects with your property that could have been found on a survey because you are choosing not to get it. And you understand that your title insurance is not going to protect you from those things.
Right.
So
Now, if they get a
if you're in the-
survey,
this might be the question you're
that
going to
same
ask.
question.
If they get a survey
Good
and
survey.
they don't like the results of the survey, can the buyer walk? If the seller does not resolve the issue,
Right.
and some of them you can't. I mean, it's
So-
beyond their control.
So here's the thing. This is my legal opinion about surveys and if the buyer can walk. So there's nothing specific within the contract that says the results of the survey are a contingency. But what I will tell you is that in my opinion, the results of the survey directly impact the marketability of the property from a title perspective. And the obligation of the seller is to convey insurable and marketable title. And those words they are exclusive. They have different meanings. Something can be insurable. I can insure a property that has a survey issue,
Mhm.
and I'm going to take exception to it. But it's not marketable.
So, in other words, you can argue the point.
You can argue that this property is not marketable for me because if with this defect, it's going to affect my ability to sell the property. So I want it fixed. And if you don't fix it, I'm going to walk. Because now seller's not doing what they're supposed to, which is to convey insurable and marketable title.
Well, isn't that something?
Okay. Yeah. But again, if they don't know, they're buying it sight unseen. They don't know if they have a marketable property or not because they didn't want the
gosh.
survey.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I think there's an adage that says, oh, what you don't know can't hurt you. And it's like, actually,
Yeah, right?
what you don't
Right.
know can hurt you and will hurt you.
Yeah.
It depends. Whoa.
Right. Well, this has been awesome. We love having you on, Kedron. We'll definitely, we
you.
might have to have you back on again just to say, we'll talk more in
Yes.
details on survey and title. Really just to, maybe we could do a whole segment on just title.
You could.
And how important that is. And most
Mhm.
people don't even think about it when they're purchasing the house, what even that means and how
Mhm.
important that is. You're buying something. Yes, you want to know the condition that you're buying, but title tells you what you're buying. Right?
Yes.
Right.
So I think that
Definitely.
would be a nice one to come back on. So we'll have to kind of take a look at that one. But
Absolutely.
yeah. So this has been fun. And again, I
Awesome.
think it's just important that when somebody's looking at buying or selling a house, that they kind of understand these aspects and that the contract is as long as it is for a reason, right?
Right.
That there's
Mhm.
certain things in there that it's good for them to read and to know and just because the choice is theirs, and that just helps them become aware so they can make better choices. So
It's a great podcast when we learn something. And I've
Yeah.
I've learned a few things today.
Yeah, exactly.
Not afraid to admit it.
Good. I love,
Yep.
I love it. Well, thank you both
Lots
for
of
having
fun.
me. It was such a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's been great.
Yes.
It's been great.
Thank you for being
Thanks.
our guest.
Definitely have you
Our
back on.
first guest.
All right.
Our first guest on the podcast.
Coffee and Keys is brought to you by Darlene Kemp, VP, Senior Loan Officer, NMLS ID 173897. Atlantic Coast Mortgage, LLC is an equal housing lender. NMLS ID 643114. www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org. And Crystal Jacques, Realtor for both RE/MAX Allegiance, 4000 Virginia Beach Boulevard, Suite 164, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23452. Office phone 757-490-7300 and RE/MAX Professionals, 20,241 North 67th Avenue, Suite A1 Glendale, Arizona 85308. Office phone 623-362-3000. Each office is independently owned and operated and supports the Fair Housing Act and Equal Opportunity Housing.